So it sounds like Terry's starting a recording. Terry, do you have anything you need to do to kick this off, or?
No, just thank you guys for coming. And I know we have some questions, so please ask your questions. We're super blessed to have Mike on here. He is our principal broker for the South Valley office, and his time is super valuable. So it's nice to get all of you guys on at the same time. So don't be shy, ask questions.
Yeah, absolutely. And we are, and then Terry, when we wrap, I'll just hit stop share and turn it off, right?
Yep.
All right. I think I know that. I got my logistics out of the way. So we'll get started, and it looks like I'm getting a notification if somebody wants to join. It allows me. I think I just added in an Elijah. So Elijah, welcome. Appreciate
Yep.
you being here.
Hello.
So Terry, we'll just run with it. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Mike.
Okay, cool. Thanks. So again, thanks everybody for being here. I think I know most of you, maybe Elijah. I don't know if we know each other, but again, Mike Carmody. I'm the principal broker of the KW South Valley office. And I was asked tonight to go through the REPC, or writing an offer. So I want this to be beneficial to all of you on here. So one thing that I could do is we could take, and I'm happy just to share one of my listings if you can see the screen. This happens to be in a backup position, but we could use this property as an example of how to write an offer. Does that work for you guys? Or would you rather me just talk about specific things on how to handle it inside the REPC?
I like the idea of an example.
Okay, terrific. All right, so I'm going to run with that because Mackenzie looked like the only one to unmute. So this should be pretty easy on Zoom. We're going to do this easy. We're going to work on the assumption that you have a buyer and you're going to be putting an offer on a property that I happen to have listed. Now, in the real world on that, we would be talking about limited agency and a limited agency document because we're within the same brokerage. But for tonight, we're just going to pretend that you guys are all John or Jane Doe with XYZ Realty. Okay. Now, how I typically do this, and one other assumption I'm going to make, you already have your buyer broker agreement signed, you have the buyer due diligence and the wire fraud, because all three of those need to be signed at the same time. Plus with KW, you have your affiliated business disclosure. And then I'm always going to recommend the 4-year protection, get a home inspection document. So I'm going to work on the fact that you've got your 5 documents signed with your buyer. You going out and you called on this property that's at 19, we'll pretend it's an active status, 1974 East Quartz Ridge Drive. And we just want to write an offer on it. You got a buyer that's got 50% down. We don't have to worry about closing costs and some addendums. We can talk about that at the end. Okay, so that being the case, I'm going to run you through the process that I would if I'm like you. I have a buyer wants to write an offer on this property. And so I'm going to move my screen controls around just a little bit here, guys, so I can see my a bit better. Okay, and I don't know how familiar, I know some people can use the, and I apologize, I can't remember the name, Sky Slope forms, okay? Right, so up here in the MLS, you can use Sky Slope forms. I haven't dove into that too much. I'm kind of old school. I go into legacy forms, and I got all my buyer docs, everything signed. I'm gonna just go in and I'm gonna drop into a packet here, this purchase contract, okay? And I have the blank contract that I pulled up. I go into auto populate form. Now, first thing I'm going to do, bear with me here, I'm going to grab my MLS number 201. Sometimes it can be a little tricky copy and pasting, right? So I'm just going to copy and paste my MLS number into here, and I'm going to hit load, okay? If this is elementary, I'm just going to go through pretty quick and assume you guys know how to do this. But what I'm looking at is it's going to give me the listing address on it with the full county, the tax ID number, county. Notice it's going to import listing inclusions and exclusions. Okay, so note, I want to check that when I go to the offer. I'm going to put, we're just going to use Jane Doe. Make it easy. Give me one name. Jane Doe is the name of our buyer. I'm the buyer's agent on it. It's already populated everything in here. And I don't know the seller's name, and county records looks like it's a trust or something. Well, then what's one thing I can do? There's nothing wrong with putting owner of record. Okay. Some standard verbiage we know. You could call the listing agent and say, hey, can you tell me the legal name of the seller? Sometimes they put it on the MLS. You could check the tax records. But again, sometimes it only has one name or not. So if you're not sure, don't be afraid to use the verbiage owner of record. Okay. And of course, it's got my licensing all populated, and we'll just do today as our offer reference date. I'm going to make sure when I do that, I'm going to hit fill and update fields. Okay. And I'm going to click auto populate just to get rid of that. And okay, so I've got a start of this purchase contract. So I'm going to go through it with Jane, who's, maybe we're on the phone talking about it and I'm filling this out, or we're sitting at the office. And so the real estate purchase contract, again, got all my buyer docs in a row. Do you guys get that? Buyer docs in a row? Okay, they're signed. Somebody should unmute and laugh, but I won't make you. There we go. Thank you. Hey, this is a legally binding real estate purchase contract. The law requires me as a licensee to use this form. Okay. You, buyer and seller, may alter or delete its provisions or to use a different form if you'd like. And also, if you desire, you can get legal tax advice. And as always, with anything we're dealing with when signing contracts, you always have the right to talk to your attorney or tax advisor. So just a little disclaimer. I don't spend a lot of time with that, but they understand that. So we have the offer reference date is today. I'm making sure I got my buyer's legal name, which is Jane Doe. Buying it from the property, again, just pretend we don't have the seller's name, so we'll just put owner of record. Don't leave it blank, right? I don't like to see blanks in anything. There's some times when maybe they're appropriate, but in this case, if you don't know the seller's name on it and you can't find out, or you can't hear back from the listing agent and you want to get this submitted, just put owner of record. And then I talked to Jane and say, okay, hey, here's a property that's listed at 1.13 million. We can talk about earnest money now. Typically, it's common to have, and most sellers would like to see 1% earnest money. But you can really do how much, whatever you want on this. But let's say we talk about doing, okay, we just decide 15,000 in earnest money. Okay. Then I'm going to ask my buyer and say, well, how are you going to deliver that to me? Me personally, I still like checks when it comes to earnest money. I know we have other forms of doing it. But if we're not quite sure, we can write check or electronic transfer. The reason why I like check or electronic transfer versus check or wire, because if you guys are familiar with the Earnest app that can be used to put in earnest money, that's not technically a wire, right? It's so electronic transfer or check is preferred verbiage, at least for myself. Okay. After acceptance of the rep sheet by buyer and seller and receipt of the earnest money by the brokerage shall have 4 calendar days in which to deposit the earnest money into the real estate brokerage account. Okay. So what I want to tell my buyers is say, if we go, when and if we go under contract, I need to make sure I receive in the brokerage the earnest money within 4 days to be in compliance with state law, right? Okay. Make sure you understand that and how that works. Now I noticed that this is already auto-populated, but anytime I auto-populate, I'm just going to toggle. I won't do it now, but I'm going to toggle back and forth, just make sure I got the right tax ID number and just double check everything, especially inclusions and exclusions when stuff's auto-populated. So property address, okay, we talk about that. And then I'm going to, I'm spending some time with the buyers to explain this. Hey, the included items in here, plumbing, heating, air conditioning, solar panels, ovens, range, go through these and look at them. Drapes, drawers, TV mounting brackets was one that they added a few years ago. So I'm gauging to make sure, based on what we've seen on the property, that the buyer has a good understanding of what's going to be included and excluded, right? And for the most part, what they're talking about here is all real property. But when it comes to personal property, I want to make sure that I'm on the same page with the buyer. So in section 1.2, we have a choice. We can see that it auto-populated the ceiling fan. Okay, well, we know that they've got to stay. But in this case, this seller's leaving the dryer, the microwave, the range, the refrigerator, okay, washer, water softener, and they've got a smart thermostat. And they have put down here now the C remarks. I'd probably delete that because we're not referencing anything on the MLS here. That has nothing to do with this contract. But the window coverings are being excluded. Okay. So I want to talk to the buyer about that. And as an agent, I'm looking out for my buyer. How many refrigerators are in the property? How many washers and dryers are in the property? Okay, it's not uncommon to see sets. If you are checking these boxes as a buyer and the seller has two refrigerators in there, one in the garage and one and they haven't excluded everything, your buyer's entitled to two of those refrigerators because these are plural. So when you're listing properties, I'm going to advise you as agents, make sure when you're selling your listing that you're doing the same thing for your seller. Did the agent check dryers? And there is two sets in there, but we weren't planning on leaving the basement set. Okay, better make sure you get something in writing to confirm these inclusions and exclusions. So back to the buyer. Have the conversations with them. Is that all you're expecting? You understand that all the nice patio furniture that they have outside, tens of thousands of dollars of it, that's all personal property that is not included. We could ask for it. You could put something in here. You could check other and add, workbench in the garage if it's not bolted in, or shelves in the basement in the blue bedroom down there, right? Can you ask for that stuff? Yeah, you can. Just make sure you're on the same page with your buyer. Okay. Water service section 1.4. Now I know this particular property, it's culinary. And so as a buyer, we just understand that this purchase includes any water source. That's the legal source for current culinary water. If that's under a water right or a water share, it's going to be included unless the seller specifically excludes it. For the most part, we're dealing with just culinary water as this particular house. And let's go back to the listing here and just pretend it's not in backup, right? You can see that this particular seller, it was started at 1.195, and then we dropped it to 1.13. Shortly after we dropped it to 1.13, we got an offer on the property, okay? Now, let's pretend that it was just listed at 1.13 and it's been on for 50 days. You ask your buyer, okay, you've walked through the house, we took a look at it, we see, hey, it's probably going to need a roof on it because it's the original roof that's 20 years old, and there may be some other updates. This is where you have that conversation based on your comparables. Do your due diligence for your buyers. When they zero in on a property, look at the comps. Share that information with them. You can give them your opinion. You can say, hey, 1.195 was pretty high, but 1.13 it looks pretty good. But if we just, we've been on the market for 60 days at 1.13, ask your buyer, what do you want to offer? Right now, if they tell you 800,000, have a conversation with them about value, and that more than likely the seller will just reject that, will not counter, and will probably never want to deal with them. So if they like the
What
property, let's start with a reasonable offer. Go ahead, Mackenzie.
what is there like an area? Let's see how to even see this between like what is offensive and what is inappropriate when negotiating price.
That's a great question, honestly. Because you never know. You could have a property that's a couple $100,000 overpriced, and you write an offer really to where you feel that it's worth, and the seller gets insulted or they don't. It's a really hard question to ask. I think I look at the history of the property. Have they done price reductions? And I look at the comparables. And I think for the most part, guys, you're going to see properties probably priced within 10% of that, of what the actual value of the house is or what the comparables are, probably closer. So my thoughts are, and if you're coming, 7 to 10% below what somebody's asking, you probably run a pretty high risk of, not getting anywhere with them, not getting anywhere with them.
What would you say is the safest percent below asking price? Like I said, that's actually beneficial to your buyer, that they would most likely accept that you've seen.
Yeah, I think, when I look at it, the recent stats, I look at, what's the average list to sale price? Okay, in COVID, it was like 110%, right? Everybody, whatever you listed at, you were getting 10% more. Right now, I think we're probably, and if you do your due diligence, look at those comps on it, and you'll probably find that most properties are selling within 2 to 3% of their asking price. Right? So that's probably the range. If we tell the buyer, hey, if we come in somewhere between 2 and 5%, we're, I don't think we're going to insult them, but we're not going to be so low that they're just not going to deal with us at all. So my thoughts on it, I guess, if I zeroed in, if you stay within probably 3% of of the asking price of a property, you're probably going to get a reasonable reaction from the seller. Okay, does that help? Everybody's muted. You guys are welcome to unmute.
Yes, it does. I was taking notes. I'm sorry. I was
Oh,
texting
that's okay.
myself because
That's
that's
all
all
right.
I have.
So again, it's just, help them. Where do we come in? We can look at comparables on it and, just look at it. And that's what the buyers are looking at. What's our expertise? And does this mean you have to, have 20 years experience? No, you can, take a look and see what the neighborhood and say, you know what, the house right next door just sold for, about 1.1 million. They're at 1.3. Now they've got a little more square footage and not all the basements finished. So I think they're pretty realistic, so if they're at 1.13 and we come in at, you know, come in within 40 to 50,000 on that, it's probably not going to be insulting to the seller. So, let's give it a shot. And frankly, I'll ask some people sometimes, how badly do you want this property? If this is the one, then give the seller what they're asking, or come in with, within 5 or 10 grand, or just see if they want to pay the cost. So it comes down to the motivation, right, to the buyer. This is really the property that they want, and it's reasonably priced based on the comparables. I have no problem recommending that to a buyer. No, hey, the value's there. Do you like this property? Why don't you try to get it before somebody else does? So every situation's a little bit different on it, but let's talk about that. I think that 3%, 3 to 5%. If you're within that, you more than likely get, you may not get it accepted, but you probably get a counteroffer versus a flat out rejection. Okay. Now, when we're filling out section 2.1, and just a little side note, guys, once I get to the bottom of the first page, which is coming up here, I know it doesn't look like it, but at the end of section 2, I'll pause for questions. So this is just simple math. Let's say they put in, we just said 1.1 million. Trying to get 30,000 off. Let's see, I think I need one more zero. Commas help. At least they do for me. Okay, 1.1 million. We got how much? 15,000 earnest money. All right. Additional earnest money. I like to put not applicable. Hey, everybody knows not applicable. I'm not leaving it blank. I could put zero. I just like not applicable because we're not doing additional earnest money. Now, for simple math, I'm just going to use that they're getting a new loan. Their loan amount is estimated to be 600,000, right? So they're putting $500,000 down. Everybody follow me on the math. Seller financing, again, not applicable. And then I just do some simple math, but I still need a calculator to do that. Be as accurate as you can with these numbers. So really just working it back. Hey, 1,100,000 is our offer. We're doing an estimated loan amount of 600,000, and we have 15,000 earnest money. Then, if my math is correct, the theoretical amount due at closing would be $585,000. Then I just, I tally it up. Okay. And when we're zero, and I put that in there. And I just double check my math on it. Now, here's the thing with this. Well, we're not quite sure what their loan amount is, guys. If you talked to the mortgage lender told them they're putting a specific number or a percentage down. Do the math. It's not complicated. Make sure your numbers add up. And most importantly, make sure 2.1 up here equals here, the purchase price, right? One thing that I always point out to the buyers in section 2.1, last sentence, any amounts shown in section 2.1 Charlie and 2.1 Echo may be adjusted as deemed necessary by the buyer and lender. Okay, that's the loan amount and the balance of the purchase price and cash at settlement. they can be adjusted by the lender as long as it doesn't change the sale price, right? So we don't need exact numbers. We want to be accurate. If your client's only putting 3% down on a property, don't show that they're putting 20% down. It's unethical, in my opinion. Consult with the mortgage lender. Hey, what are they looking to put down? Do the math. Okay. And let your buyer know that, if they choose that they want to close on this property and 5 days before they close, they decide they only want to put $200,000 down, you do not need to get permission from the seller to do that. It's not changing the purchase price. Okay. Section 2.2 is a big one. Okay. Buyer's obligation to purpose to obtain the loan reference or any portion of the cash reference for that loan is or is not conditioned upon the sale of real estate owned by a buyer. We're going to say this buyer does not need to sell a house. We get into a situation where they do have a contingency. We'll do another class on that because a little bit longer conversation. Okay, so far, that's actually the end of the first page. Questions? All right, I'm just going to keep moving. Guys, again, you owe it to your clients to have an understanding of this document. So as I go through, I'm going to be talking to Jane. Jane, I want to talk to you a little bit about settlement. We use a settlement deadline, but everybody, including myself, we all say, hey, we're going to go to close at the title company on this day. Well, settlement, think of this, is synonymous of when you sign the document. So settlement's the date we're going to go sign. Typically in Utah, when it closes is the following day. Everybody signs on a Wednesday, and then every title companies trade documents, mortgage lender gets everything, does their QC, and they usually close the next day. I like closing, as it says here. It means settlement's been completed, proceeds of new loan have been delivered to the escrow office, and most importantly, the closing documents have been recorded. So settlement's when we're going to sign. Closing when it's been recorded. Okay. Now we're going to talk about possession. We're going to make it easy on this one. We're going to check upon recording. We'll pretend the property is vacant. Okay. So possession is one that my rule for years was always if the property was occupied by a seller and they were still in the property, and they're going to plan to do that until they close. I always like to give the sellers a courtesy 48 hours to move out. Okay. That's just my personal opinion because sellers, sometimes back in the day when the market was tough, they didn't have the money to hire the moving company until the property actually closed and they got money to do it. Right. And nobody really wants to move out of their house until it's recorded. So best practice, I'm going to tell you, though, is for liability for everyone is to put upon recording. That's why I love vacant properties, okay? Prorations, assessments, and payment obligations. Prorations, okay, we just need to say, homeowners' dues, property taxes, if there was any rents on an investment property, everything's prorated to the date of recording, okay? They may base it off the settlement date, but usually it'll be the recording date. Now, this one does have a small HOA. Let's go back to it and look and see is okay. We don't have much information. It doesn't really do much. It's more just for like the main entrance and grounds, a couple common areas, but it's $58 a month. So we want to be able to tell our buyer, hey, we understand that you do have homeowners association dues, and you've probably already talked about that and what that includes. Now, in this case, in section 4.2, when you're representing a buyer, I'm just going to tell you check seller here because this says any assessments for capital improvements as approved by the homeowners association or assessed by a municipality or special improvement district. I've never seen one of those. I'm sure they've happened, but we do know HOAs can levy assessments in the community, if they need to redo the roads or redo roofs and stuff, if that is covered. So you want to protect your buyer, check seller, okay? If the seller doesn't like that, they can counter you. In section 4.3, escrow fees, everybody agrees to pay their, buyer will have their escrow fee, seller will pay their escrow fee. If you're dealing with a rental property, this talks about rental deposits and any for long-term leases or rentals on how they're going to collect that and issue credits, okay? 4.3C, HOA and other entity fees due upon change of ownership, reinvestment fees, as they call them, enhancement fees. Okay, most HOAs have them. Some are real expensive. Daybreak, you guys know what it is, and anybody know
Is
what
that
it
a
is?
transfer fee? Because I'm actually dealing with someone in Daybreak right now, and there's transfer fees.
Yeah, they're either called a transfer fee, a community enhancement fee, an HOA investment fee. It's just look at this, what they call is change of ownership fee. Do you know how much it is in Daybreak, Mackenzie?
It's usually 0.05%. So it's like the homes I've been looking at with my client are around 2 grand or a little bit more. Sometimes they're only a couple hundred, but they can be expensive.
They can be, yeah, and especially if you get into townhomes, Harriman's rife with it, where there's master HOAs and then the HOA itself, sometimes two or three, and they all have these fees. Okay, be aware of that. As a buyer, click seller. Okay, can it be negotiated? Yeah. Does the HOA care who pays it? No, they don't. It's going to be the buyer or seller, and it depends on the market. Guess who paid them during COVID? Buyers did. There was none of the sellers were doing that. They were taking everything in the kitchen sink that they could get from the buyer. Okay, in our market, you're just saying, hey, seller, here's it. You're responsible for it. That can be countered, or if you're talking, say, hey, it's not too bad of a fee. We want to give a good offer. We'll pay for it. Just before you decide on this, or if you don't know what the transfer fee is, I'd be reluctant to tell you to have it checked by buyer, because if it's a Daybreak like property and your buyer ends up with that there and then they find out they've got a $3,500 transfer fee, not going to be real happy with you. Okay, so again, representing the buyer for two, I'm always seller and seller.
Is it sorry, a little bit off topic for just a second. Is it appropriate to ask the agent if they have any other offers on the table before you fill this out?
Sure, absolutely. Can ask whatever you want. Can the listing agent tell you?
Probably not, huh?
Depends. If their seller has given them permission to discuss that. So I'm going to flip you guys over and put you all as listing agents right now. And I call you and say, do you have any other offers on it? As a listing agent, I'm going to be, okay, what did I talk with my seller about that? If I don't have any other offers on the property, I'm going to tell you I do not, because I think that's an ethical thing. Okay. Truthful and honest. If I don't have another physical offer on the property, I, as the agent, am going to tell you, no, I do not have any other offers.
And you're gonna say that without, you don't need to get permission to say
No,
that?
no, I don't. But have good detailed conversations with your sellers when you're a listing agent. Say, hey, I get agents that are calling and they may ask if we have any offers, Mr. and Mrs. Seller. And I'm going to say, my ethical duties to you and everybody involved of honesty. If we don't have another offer, I'm not going to tell them that we do. I'm not going to lie. Now, what if we do have multiple offers? How do you want me to handle that? My experience, most sellers will say, sure, let them know, let's get people bidding. So again, talk to your seller. But as a buyer's agent, ask all the questions you want, because if the listing agent tells you something they're not supposed to, that's on them, not you. Okay.
Okay, and then let's say that they do have multiple offers on the table. Would you just offer it? Would that be a place where you'd like, I would offer full price? Like, what would you recommend your client, your buyer client to do if there were multiple offers?
Yeah, well, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to ask the listing agent. So you got multiple offers. Can you tell me anything about them? Do you have any that are above asking price? I'm going to ask them a bunch of questions, because again, I'm representing the buyer. If they tell me something that they shouldn't, again, that's on them, right? I'm not trying to trick them. But I've had some agents just say, Mike, we've had really good activity. We're slammed with offers on this. Obviously, 1.13. We are going to be under contract above that. And, that's probably me saying that as the listing agent to you, if you ask that. Or I may just be kind of a blank statement. Hey, I've got some really good competitive offers with some really tight time frames. It's probably about much as you're going to get, Mackenzie. Okay.
Okay,
So,
and then that's when you would kind of decide and sit down with your client, and that's how you would like recommend what they
yeah.
do, right?
Yep, I'm going to be telling them, and let's shift gears a little bit on that and say, okay, hey, you know what? Listing agent just called and told me he's received four offers. Let's pretend it's Monday night, and man, they had four offers come over the weekend. He's got some really good offers on it. And my guess is he's probably closer to, 1.15 million instead of 1.13. So I think if you want a shot at this property, again, how bad do you want it? Well, Mike, we really want this property. Well, then I'm going to have a conversation. We could talk about an escalation clause and those type of things. I'm probably going to tell you, well, you know what? Get these out of here. I'd leave 4.2 is paid for by the seller. That's not too bad because it's just having the chances of them having a capital assessment approved. It's possible, but at the very minimum, I say, well, you know what? Transfer fees, $1,500. Let's check that you'll pay that. That's one thing we can do to make our offer stronger, right? When I get finished with this, I'm going to talk a little bit about an escalation clause. How's that?
That'd be great.
Okay, cool. So let's come back to this here. So real estate, hey, here's new, right? Just a few weeks old now. They finally put it in here, real estate brokerage compensation. Okay, so prior to writing the offer, I called the listing agent and I asked, are you listing agent, are you or the seller offering any cooperative compensation? And the listing agent says, yes, I'm authorized to offer 3%. And I say, great. I have a buyer broker at 3%. Can I send you over the brokerage compensation agreement before I send the offer? And the listing agent says, sure. So I sign it, I fill it out, I sign it, I put 3% on it. In fact, let's give me a second, guys.
Wait, did you say before you send an offer, you talk to the agent and send over your buyer broker agreement?
Well, not your buyer broker agreement. There's two ways you can get paid. You can get paid in the REPC, or you can get paid from the listing broker like we used to do it. Real estate brokerage compensation agreement. Okay, this is broker to broker. Okay, between the seller's brokerage and the buyer's brokerage in contemplation of a potential real estate transaction between Jane Doe and owner of record at this particular property. I have all the information. I'm going to estimate that we're going to close within a 2-month time period, so I'll probably just take it easy, or just pick a date, throw it out there for a couple months, and then I'm going to put 3% in there. And then, as you can see down here, the underside agree to the terms: seller's brokerage, buyer's brokerage, signature of authorized seller's agent or broker. And in this case, I'm the authorized buyer's agent, or I could have yours truly sign it. I'm going to sign this. I'm going to send this over. I might have my buyer sign it, but I don't need my buyer to sign it right away. And then I'm going to send it over to the listing agent. And if he's really on top of it and he signs it and sends me a copy back, I have just secured a 3% commission if we end up under contract and closing.
And that's from them, the commission from them.
That is from them. It's actually the seller paying it, but the listing broker is authorized to enter into this real estate brokerage compensation agreement. Okay.
Would you recommend just doing that every time?
I like that, guys, because let's look at the reality of this. If I go back into here in the offer and I don't take a minute and push the listing, now if the listing agent says, no, I'm not going to sign it, put it in the offer, then come in here and put it in the offer. Okay. If the listing agent, if I was the listing agent on this particular, and you called me and you said, what is your seller offering? And in this case, I'll tell you, the seller is offering 2.5%. If that works for you, you as the buyer's agent, it behooves you to quickly fill out that, because you have the information. Okay. Let's look at this document and what we need to fill it out. We know the listing brokerage. We know our brokerage. We know your buyer's name. We don't need to, we can just put owner of record, and we got the property address. So I'm going to sign this, or Mackenzie, I'm going to use you as the buyer's agent. You sign this, you send it over to me as the listing agent. I sign it. I may send it to my seller, but the buyer and the seller only sign this as an acknowledgement of receipt. Once an authorized buyer's agent or broker, or listing agent and broker, once there's both signatures there, this is a legal enforceable document that this listing brokerage will have to pay you, the buyer's brokerage, at closing this amount, okay? It's outside of the REPC. It's kept outside of the REPC. Does that mean that things couldn't get renegotiated? Absolutely. But I like this. I feel that most buyers agents aren't really taking this seriously and utilizing this. And I think there's a lot of listing agents like me that I'm happy to. My seller's given me authorization in this property to offer 2.5%. Now, if your buyer broker is 3 and you want more, or you're okay at 2.5, send this over and sign it. It keeps it out of the REPC. So let's come back to the REPC, pretend that listing agent just says, no, put it in the offer. I come in here, I'm going to check 3%. I'm talking to my buyer about this. Guys, this is that fee that I have on my buyer broker, where we are asking the seller, not the seller's brokerage in the offer, we're asking the seller to cover that fee for you. Make sense? Buyers go, yep, that's cool. Hopefully they'll do that. Sales proceeds and withholding, read about that, guys. It's kind of boring stuff. Okay. But
Wait,
buyer and seller,
Can
you're
you go
direct.
back to the
Mhm.
Can you go back to that? So you put the 3 in that first box because that's what you're asking from the seller, correct?
But you're asking from the seller. Yep. Has nothing to do with the
Okay.
listing brokerage.
Because
Okay.
I remember at one of my like first meetings, I was watching you do this, and it was a different language. I didn't understand it, but it looked complicated. Now, what do you
Yeah,
do with the other box?
there might be some you might be thinking about some of the listing stuff where it had to do with compensation with that new agreement, and it's gotten a little.
I think I am.
Actually, watch
Okay.
for my broker moment Monday. We got some new guidance from UAR to make that really simple when it comes to the listing agreement. But in this case here, I'm just checking one or the other. Okay. I'm okay in this case, again, leaving it blank because I'm not doing this one. Okay. But you could put 0 to buyer's brokerage. In this case, though, I'm probably just going to leave this one blank because it's one or the other. Shall contribute. It's this or. So I'm sticking with 3%. If you've got a flat fee that you're charging your buyer of 12,000, then put it in here. Okay. Confirmation of agency disclosure. In this case, going to look a little weird. Well, pretend on this, guys. Let's say I'm the listing agent on it, and you're in my office. And Mackenzie, I'm gonna pick on you because you've been chatting a bit. Or no, I'll pick on Vicky. Vicky's and I'm not picking. But let's say Vicky is the buyer's agent here. Vicky, I don't need your license number, but I'll just delete that. Okay, you guys tell me. Okay, seller's agent we know represents the seller. And because I'm the principal broker of this office, seller's brokerage. What do I check here? Vicky, what would you check on this?
I will check seller.
Check seller, okay. And then buyer's agent, you
I will
represent the
represent buyer.
buyer, yeah.
Yes,
And then here is the buyer's brokerage.
buyer.
Uh-huh. Okay. Now you guys tell me, is that correct? Any thoughts on it?
Yes.
I think so.
All right. We're both within the same brokerage, okay? It's not. I'm going to just tell you, you need to do this.
Oh, okay.
But read it this way. Michael Carmody, even I'm the principal broker, or if this was, I'm going to use Mackenzie. Let's pretend I'm just going to put M in there for Mackenzie for just speed. Okay, so Mackenzie, you're the listing agent. You represent the seller. Seller's brokerage. Just think me when you think of me as an individual as the broker. I'm limited because you're both in the same office. Vicky, yes,
Okay.
you represent the buyer.
Mm-hmm.
So anytime you're doing what we call an in-house sale, just remember under the brokerage is limited, but you're not. Mackenzie, you're representing the seller. Vicky,
But
you're
does that
representing the buyer.
is that for just Keller Williams South Valley for us? What
Yes.
about the other ones?
Great question. No, just for Keller Williams South Valley. Just for
Okay.
Keller Williams South Valley. Because what? If this was KW Salt Lake as the seller, then
Mm-hmm.
it would be, Mackenzie representing the seller. The seller's brokerage is KW. Think it's the seller's brokerage is Dave Fredrickson, buyer's brokerage is Mike Carmody. Okay. So when you get into limited agency, and just a side note, if this was the case, if one of you guys were writing an offer on mine or any other agent in the office, when you're doing that, just always remember, when an in-house sale, I gotta have the limited agency agreement signed when I send the offer.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, on time, and then we can get through some stuff. Oops, I didn't want to do that. Limited agency, just real quick on this. Okay, name of buyer, Jane Doe, name of seller, owner of record, agent representing the buyer. Let's pretend that's Vicky. And agent representing the seller is Mackenzie. Here, address of the property. The principal or branch broker, you know, it just talks about agency on it, seller's agent, limited agency, right? Just read these documents, guys. They're very self-explanatory. But you would come down here and you would check this. 2 agents. The buyer and seller consent to Mackenzie, continuing to represent the seller, and Vicky representing the buyer, and the principal branch broker acting as a limited agent as described above. So if that was the case, and Vicky, you were writing an offer and this was Mackenzie's listing, you want to have this in here and get this signed first, right? Because it's basically agency disclosure. Okay?
So this is my responsibility to fill out this form and send it to.
You do, yes. Get this filled out because it's going to need it, and send it with part of your offer. It's not an addendum to the contract, just totally separate. But I always like to see this. Get this time stamped and signed before the physical offer if you're doing electronic signatures. Make it the first, because you need to disclose agency, right? Going back to, it's the first thing. Buyer and seller acknowledge prior written receipt of agency disclosures provided by the respective agents. So before my seller, again, we went down a little rabbit hole, but it's good information to know. If there's nothing limited, you've got your buyer broker signed and it's with XYZ Realty, it's not KW South Valley. What we just talked about is a moot point. We have a big brokerage. We talked about limited agency. I hope that was helpful. Okay, and then how to fill this out. Okay, I'm gonna kind of cruise through this a little bit more, just as I would say, folks, you know, okay, we're writing an offer on this property, and if the seller accepts it, that they represent that they actually have title to the property and that they actually own it and they can transfer marketable title with a policy of title insurance to insure you as Mr. Buyer, Miss Buyer, against any future, you know, liens and encumbrances that might come up that was a result of when the seller owned it. Okay, so title insurance is great, and cool thing is the seller's paying for it. Okay. Now, seller disclosures. By the seller disclosure deadline that we're going to send at the end of the offer, the seller has to give us certain things. One of them is a written property condition disclosure. In this case, the property is built after 78, so we won't expect a lead-based paint. They're going to have to give us a commitment for title insurance, and I'll go through that with you. Hey, there's the HOA here. They got to give us the CC&Rs, rules, regulations, most recent minutes, budget, financial statement. Okay, the seller has to get that. Folks, shift gears. Put your listing agent hat on. When you're the listing agent and you're working with your sellers, you need to have anything applicable in here ready to go by the seller disclosure deadline on behalf of your seller. Because if you don't, your seller could be considered in default. Okay. So again, to my buyer, you know, if there's any short-term leases, long-term leases, any water rights. So this is all the stuff that the seller is going to give us that we have time to review during our due diligence time period, which leads me to the big 3 contingencies in our offer. Okay. Jane, remember our buyer's Jane Doe. We're back to Jane. Jane, we're going to put a deadline at the end of this of what we call the due diligence condition and due diligence deadline, which basically says you have the right to, you know, review all the information, get home inspections done, basically do whatever you want in testing the property, as long as it doesn't alter or destroy the property at your cost, but gather all the information you want to make a decision of whether you want to move forward. So we are going to check that. We definitely want to have that contingency. Okay. And we have the right to either cancel or try to resolve objections by that deadline with the seller. And I'll talk to you a little bit more about that when we get to section 24. And then we talk about if you don't do anything and we just go by that deadline, then we can't cancel the contract for due diligence, right? That makes sense. Like if you don't do any inspections on it, you can't cancel for due diligence. We're also going to make it subject to appraisal because your mortgage lender probably will require an appraisal on the property, and we'll have a deadline for that. Same with in 8.3 is getting financing, right? Getting a loan. So we want to have enough time to make sure that you get a loan before your earnest money deposit goes non-refundable. And in this case, I'm just going to make it easy for this year. We can do a different class really talking about writing offers if you're really competitive. This is a spot buyer's right to cancel before the finance and appraisal deadline. So if you don't understand this, put 0. COVID, this was used a lot. And I know we referred to COVID, and what we mean by that was the COVID market. Absolutely crazy. If you were putting $15,000 earnest money and you had 5 days to get your inspections done because that's what you needed to do to get your offer accepted, it was not uncommon to see people having to do half of their earnest money. So they were pretty much right here. If I do this, I'm telling the seller, if I cancel after my due diligence deadline for whatever reason, I'm giving you $7,500 of my earnest money. I'm putting hard earnest money after. That's what this means. Read this and understand it. Okay. Questions on that?
So you just put 0 from now on.
Yep. If you're not familiar with how this really works and how it can be a benefit to the buyer by telling them they're really serious. A buyer that's just saying, listen, I know I got to get a loan, but I am 100% I'm going to get financing. And if I don't, then my bad. But Mr. and Mrs. Seller, I just want to be able to do a home inspection, and I'll do it quick. And your buyer wants to put some skin in the game. If they put money in here, if I did $15,000, if my buyer cancels the day after the due diligence deadline, what happens?
You lost the money.
Okay. If I don't close on it, my buyer doesn't close on it. They don't give the money right away. It's just if the buyer doesn't close or they cancel because they can't get a loan, they just lost 15 grand. Pretty cut and dry. Okay. Until you're real familiar with it and reading them. Side note here, guys, read this document 15, 20 times. Read it once a day. You will absorb so much and get a great understanding that you will be able to go through this with your sellers with ease and understand it and really do your due diligence and reasonable care, fiduciary duties, right? To explain it to them. Okay. So we put 0 in there. We talk about that we can do it in additional earnest money. Okay. We're dealing with just normal time period contract. We're going to check it's not. We're going to make this real easy for them. We're not doing any addendums to that. Now, you could come into here and you could attach this. So I'm going to back up. This is what I would recommend. So technically you're making it an addendum or an attachment to the contract, but at the top of you can see at the limited agency consent agreement, there's nowhere to put the addendum number. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like an addendum, you'd be able to put 1, 2, 3, 4. We don't have that here, but can you come in and put this as yes, that we want to make that part of it with the limited agency. So just check other and then just put whatever the full name of the doc, limited agency disclosure. Okay. We'll make it real easy, guys. When it comes to home warranty, this is really self-explanatory. It either will be provided or will not. Okay. It's either going to be paid for, ordered by buyer or seller. Typically, have your buyer order it. Make sure that it's a company selected by the buyer. Don't get too crazy with buyer. Make sure if you want the seller to pay for it, we're going to order it by a company we choose, paid for by the seller, not to exceed $700. I see a lot of times agents do this. They check buyer. Hey, we want to order it from a company we select, and they inadvertently check that. You go under contract, and I guarantee a lot of times your buyer is expecting that the seller was going to pay for it. So just be careful. If you're asking the seller to pay for it, check that. Otherwise, it's on the buyer and will probably end up being you paying for it, right?
Is 700 the usual amount that people put in?
That's what I'm doing. I'm finding right now on a standard, house that's probably below 5,000 square feet. Yeah, I think, I like IBEX. I'd recommend guys, you can make recommendations to your clients. A lot of times what I do is we keep a list of 3 or 4 or 5. We send it to the buyer to, if they, if we get one included with it, have them do their due diligence, look at it. 9 times out of 10, they say, Mike, which one would you go with? And then I tell them that. But I'm going to send them that multiple multiple companies for them to review. Okay.
Okay.
So condition of the property, again, read these guys and find your own verbiage on it. The buyer acknowledges and agrees that physical condition, they're purchasing it. This is an as-is contract. Okay. It is as is. Seller doesn't have to do anything. Buyer doesn't have to buy it. Okay, seller agrees to keep it in the same general condition and not make any changes. Final pre-settlement walkthrough, typically not earlier than 7 days, but usually the day we sign, day before we sign, we're going to go through and make sure that everything is taken care of. If you ask for repairs, if you negotiate repairs to be done, do the final walkthrough with your client and verify that those repairs have been done to the satisfaction of the buyer. Get receipts from the seller if applicable. Do the walkthroughs. Agents, I hate to say it, they get lazy. Oh, we were in it 2 weeks ago. We're good. Guys, most of the problems I see is because, I don't say most, but a lot of problems I see is the agent didn't take their buyer to go do a final walkthrough and really look at the property, especially when, seller was supposed to fix some water heater venting or some other issue. They just assumed it was done. Take care of your buyers. Do those walkthroughs, okay?
Would you do a walkthrough?
Yeah,
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Would you do it if they're buying as is? Would they still be doing the walkthroughs and
Absolutely.
inspection? Okay.
Yeah. What happened if the day before you guys signed, the house burned down?
That makes sense.
Yeah. What if there was standing water in the basement, right? Do it as close to settlement as possible. But yes, always do a walkthrough. Yeah, even if it's as is, they know there could have been something to change. A ceiling fell down, problem, no fault of the seller, just something happened in the property. Again, take the time. We owe it to the buyers. It's their interest over ours. The buyer's that's agency. You're putting that, our principal, the buyer in this case, their interest over ours. Okay, don't get lazy. Go to the home inspection walkthrough reviews. Understand the property, especially if you're going to be getting into repairs. And I'm happy to talk with any of you guys and do more, what I call kind of higher level classes, if you will. Today we're a little more elementary, but so I'm going to come back. This is when I tell the folks, hey, this is where we kind of get into the legalese part of the contract, folks. Okay. But one big one, changes during the transaction. I don't sign for you as a buyer's agent. Everything that we do is going to be in writing and signed by the applicable party, in this case, between the buyer and seller. Okay. So I'll read these a little bit. If there's nothing on a property management agreement, I won't get into that. But basically, the seller is agreeing not to alter anything or enter into leases, property management agreements without prior written consent of the buyer. When the buyer goes under contract on this property, they kind of own the rights to it, right? If you look at it that way. Some attorneys might kill me for saying it that way, but they have a right to this property. It's theirs to buy. So the seller can't do alterations, just decide, well, I'm going to rent and put a tenant in. No, they can't do that unless they get prior written consent from the buyer after they're under contract, okay? Authority assigners is, if the seller's a corporation and this is a complete contract with it's an addendum. Again, read it, put it into your own words on how to explain this. Mediation, if a dispute arose between you and the buyer, we can check shall or may. I've vacillated over the years, but you know what? I'm a may guy, and I'm going to stick with me being a may guy. Because if you check shall and a dispute arises, you got to go to mediation, and sometimes your buyer or seller may have to pay for mediation. If you check may, they have the option. They can go get an attorney right away. So I'm just saying I'm a may guy. You can be whatever you want. As a broker, I'm not telling you what to do on that. Default, it's a big one, guys. Have an understanding of this. Buyer default, seller may elect one of the following reps: cancel the Rep C and retain earnest money deposits or deposits as liquidated damages. Let's say the finance and appraisal deadline was yesterday and the buyer just found out today that they can't get the loan and they can't close in the property, and you send a cancellation over, you probably ought to send a cancellation over that says the seller's getting the earnest money. Okay. You don't have to, right? You can always ask them to give it back to you, but that's what happens if the buyer. So it's one of two things. As a buyer, you want to explain, I don't like a lot of earnest money as a broker, right? It's just, you have to understand that, earnest money, make sure if your buyer is giving you a lot of earnest money, that you're always, like with any client, watching your deadlines, and you're communicating to them, folks, that if we get beyond our finance and appraisal deadline and you change your mind, you're going to lose your 15 grand. Okay. I'm not going to guarantee it. I'll ask for it back, but this is pretty cut and dry. Now, earnest money works both ways, guys. So when you're a listing agent and you get an offer from a buyer that's putting down $100,000 earnest money, what do I tell my sellers? Earnest money works both ways. If you default, seller defaults, you call and tell me that you're not going to close on this transaction and you're going to just let it lapse, you're in default. The buyer can require their 100,000 back and demand an amount equal to from you. So it's $100,000 penalty. So explain to your buyers and sellers, read this 100 times and understand it. Be able to explain it. If you can't explain it, you probably don't understand it, right? I'm running into, I still have a lot of that stuff. Some of these new forms, if I'm having a hard time explaining it, I got to spend more time with it and understand it better, okay? Attorney's fees and costs. If you got into a dispute, prevailing party could get their attorney's fees paid. And notices, if we give notice, like a notice of cancellation, it has to be in writing, signed by you, and received by the buyer or seller, okay? No assignment, we're agreeing not to assign this contract unless we get permission from the seller. Insurance and risk of loss, again, some legalese, but basically that your buyer's putting in here that they will get property insurance on that when they close. Okay, their mortgage lender is going to demand it, but if your buyer's a cash buyer, remind them to get homeowners insurance. There's no mortgage lender telling them they have to. Do people forget stuff? Yeah, be a good agent. If there was a fire in the property, you can read about the 10% rule there, that if the house had a fire and it did more than 10% of the purchase price and damage, then the contract can immediately be dissolved and everybody go their separate ways and buyer get their earnest money back, no penalties, okay? Time is of the essence. This, I think, more is really for agents. Please look at your deadlines. Watch them. You're there. You're looking out for your client's best interests. Okay. Acceptance. Acceptance occurs when the buyer, if we send this offer and the seller just signs it and that's all they do, has it been accepted? So I'll pick on, Vic, you wrote this offer, you send it over to me tonight, and I meet with my seller and they sign it at 8 o'clock tonight, and I don't call you at all. Are we under contract?
Yes.
Yes, I think so.
Well, let me see. Did this happen? Acceptance occurs only when all of the following have occurred. Seller or buyer, so in this case, seller has signed the offer where noted to indicate acceptance. I did that, right?
Yeah.
Did I do this? And seller or their agent, me, has communicated to the other party, meaning you, Vicky, that the offer has been signed as required.
Oh, didn't.
I didn't. So no, we're not under contract. You may think that. So
Okay.
technically, even if I had my seller sign it at 8 o'clock tonight, and I just kept it and I went on my merry way, and I figured, well, I'll just call Vicky tomorrow afternoon. I'm going to get up and go to the gym in the morning. And in the morning, your buyer calls and says, man, I freaked out, man. I got real buyer's remorse on this. Can we cancel this contract? Well, I haven't heard anything from Mike. My recommendation would be for you to do that is quick send a cancellation. Now, because we're not under contract, because I haven't communicated it to you.
Okay.
Does the communicating need to be like an email in writing?
Yeah, it says in here, communicated to the other party or to the other party's agent that the offer has been. An email and a text would suffice for that. Now, let's say that I did communicate it to you and we just went under contract and I called you tomorrow morning and you're super psyched, and 12 hours later, your buyer says, I got cold feet. There's no way. And I just lost my job. Can we cancel the contract? Can you cancel the contract, Vicky?
No, you're already under contract.
Yeah, but can your buyer cancel it if he loses his job?
Isn't that what due diligence is for?
Yeah. I should probably do this section first. Let's see. Let's just do this. And then seller disclosures. Okay, we're writing the offer tonight. If we get on, assume hopefully we're under contract next day or two. I'm going to just give 4 or 5 days for the seller to get us all the disclosures. And then I'm going to want to the 30th for inspections. And then I'm going to go into October. And I'm going to put the 11th for that. And, putting some pretty tight deadlines on here. Then we'll just put the 16th sign. Okay, so then we did that. So that's the end of our purchase contract, right? So I tell buyer, I'm going to submit the offer tonight once you sign this. And we're going to ask them to have us all their seller disclosures. This is the seller's deadline, 23rd. That's going to give us till the 30th. We can start our inspections anytime, but we'll probably get the disclosures very quickly. This will give us to the 30th to do our due diligence. And then we're going to put out, because your lender needs some time to get the appraisal, we're going to put out the 11th of October. And then we're going to propose to settle it on the 16th. And then we're going to put, I'm going to give the listing agent until, just 2 o'clock. We want to see, he said his folks are around, and if we got him an offer, we're going to give him till 2 o'clock tomorrow to respond, hopefully accept our offer. Yeah, that's it, guys, right? We filled it out. We took a couple detours and talking about some limited agent fees and the possibility of doing the brokerage compensation agreement rather than putting the brokerage fee in the contract. Now, a couple questions I'm going to ask you guys on. So back to that. Let's say we're under contract and we're going to put us to tomorrow morning. My sellers have signed it, Vicky. I sent you a copy of this and said, congratulations, we're under contract. I look forward to working with you. Sunday morning, your buyer wakes up and just has a panic attack because he got an email from his office over the weekend that he lost his job. There's no way he's buying a property and he wants out. And number one, can he?
I didn't catch your question, Mike.
I'm sorry, can he cancel?
He is under contract. If he cancel, he needs to give earnest money back plus the same amount earnest money to compensate the buyer.
No, okay, let me rephrase that, because what I was asking, sorry. We're under contract. I'm the listing agent. You're the buyer's agent. We're under contract on this house, and we're going to just move forward. And it's tomorrow morning, and I called and sent you the contract. And then Sunday morning, your buyer calls and says, hey, I lost my job. No way I can buy this house. Can your buyer cancel?
We're already under contract. If he cancel, you lose earnest money.
Will we? Anybody else have any thoughts on that?
He can cancel? Because
Antonio, did you say he can?
he can, because it hasn't been the due diligence deadline.
Okay. Anybody else have any thoughts? All right. Well, I'm going to tell you, Antonio, you're correct on that. Yes, Vicky, your buyer can cancel. Well, why? Well, if he lost his job, let's look at what are these? Due diligence and B24B, 24C. What are they? They're contingencies. Let's look at the due diligence. Buyer's obligation to purchase is conditioned upon due diligence.
Okay.
Buyer's obligation to purchase is conditioned upon a buyer obtaining a loan. So, yeah, I want you guys to get a good understanding of that. Yes, if that happened, I would call the listing agent and I would send over a cancellation based on finance and appraisal, because I can do that right up until 4:59 on the 11th.
Okay.
But if I'm 2 days into it, I call the listing agent and say, man, my buyer lost his job. I'm so sorry. He's heartbroken. He really wanted to buy the property, but There's
Mhm.
no way we can get a loan now, or you got to have a job to get a loan, right? So I
Mhm.
would send over as the buyer's agent, if I were you, Vicky, I'm going to say, we're going to do that cancellation based on finance and appraisal. Now, Antonio, you said same thing would do. You could use, but use the cancellation for what you're canceling for. Technically, he could cancel because he's even within the due diligence time period, right?
Mhm.
So, guys, read through these, get an understanding of what it is. Okay, here's my next question for you. What happens on October 11th at 5:01 p.m. to the
Then
buyer?
then the buyer cannot cancel it. He will lose the earnest money.
Okay. Anybody else have any thoughts on that?
If it's just by choice and not because of the loan and every situation with that.
So you could. I'm not sure if I understand you on that, Mackenzie.
Isn't there due diligence for when they can back out, but isn't there a separate almost due diligence for financing?
Yeah, I think I know what you're getting at. So I'm going to back up just a little bit. What happens on October 11th at 5:01 p.m.? The way I look at it is, and I need to explain this to my buyer, that if you have not canceled this contract for due diligence or finance and appraisal, then at 5:01 p.m. on October 11th, your earnest money effectively goes non-refundable, folks. In this case, Jane, right? Jane was our buyer. The reason why is we have no more contingencies. If you don't close on it, and what something Vicky said, yeah, the buyer could cancel,
Mhm.
but it's pretty cut and dry. They're going to more than likely lose their earnest money due to 16.1 that says because the buyer would go into default if they didn't sign on it, if they canceled after this deadline. So here's how I look at a contract, guys, when I'm explaining it to my buyers. And I don't know, maybe it's good, maybe it's not. But the way I explain it to my buyers, and probably explain it more to my sellers when I'm looking at offers. If I'm looking at this from a seller's perspective, I'm telling my sellers, folks, I really don't care about their due diligence deadline. And what that means is they're going to get a home inspection done on it and we can negotiate everything. But the reality is that this buyer could cancel this contract for whatever reason they come up with
Mhm.
up until October 11th
5
at 5
5
o'clock.
p.m. Mhm.
You know, they do not have any skin in the game. So as a listing agent, I want some tight deadlines so the buyer can't change their mind. And when I say change their mind, or the reason why, that if I have a buyer that gets through the due diligence or something, and then on October 8th, they come and they're just mad that they didn't get a new roof on the house. And I said, that's it, Mike, I'm out of here. Cancel the contract. Well, I'm going to tell them, you can cancel the contract, but we're going to need to do it for financing and appraisal. Otherwise, if you cancel it for due diligence, you're beyond the deadline. You'd be pretty dumb to do that. You're going to lose your earnest money. Now, why do I say that about Section 8? Because the way this is written, 8.3 BI, buyer's right to cancel before the finance and appraisal deadline. If buyer, in buyer's sole discretion, is not satisfied with the terms and the conditions of the loan, the buyer may, after the due diligence deadline, cancel the contract by providing written notice to the seller no later than the finance and appraisal deadline. Okay, and at which time, unless you've got money in here, if that's zero, the earnest money gets released to the buyer. So when you hear agents and myself included talking about, hey, because of buyer's sole discretion, let me ask you guys this to kind of hit this point home, and then I'll wrap up. And I really appreciate your time. I know we've gone over a little bit. Let's say that we're looking at this contract. You're representing the buyer, and I'm going to be the listing agent on it. That on October 10th, the buyer calls you to tell you they don't want to buy the property. They've changed their mind. And that's all they tell you. They want you to cancel it due to finance and appraisal condition. They don't really need to tell you guys. It's buyer's sole discretion. But on the 10th, You talked to me and told me that, yep, we're signing. We're going to sign early. We're going to sign tomorrow on the 11th at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. The loan has been approved. The buyer's loan docs are there. The seller's going to go in the morning and sign, but the buyer tells me at 4 o'clock on the 11th to cancel the contract. Can the buyer do that, number one, and get their earnest money back?
I think he can
Yep. Why?
because it's contingency is not past the time yet.
There you go, right? It's not 5 o'clock on
It's
October
not
11th.
5
Now,
o'clock.
I'm the listing agent. I call you guys up and we'll pretend that you're all listing the property. You can't cancel. Your buyer's loan has been approved. The closing documents are at title. My seller's going to sign in 3 hours and you're sending over. No way. We're going to sue you. We're getting an attorney. Is the listing agent right that the buyer can't cancel? Loan's been approved. Clear to close. Docs are at title.
I don't think so. On the item 8, it says buyer has the right to cancel before financing
Right.
contingency.
You're absolutely right. And I've run into that situation and I've been that listing agent. I'm like, what are you talking about? But here's what I know. As an agent and a broker for a long time, I make sure that my buyers and sellers understand this finance and appraisal deadline, that is their. So I make sure that my sellers know that regardless if they had the loan approved, the clear to close, the documents were, a week early at title, the buyer can still cancel because in their sole discretion, they could say the rate was 6.5. I wanted 1.75 on a 30-year fixed. Can they do it? Yeah, they can. Buyer sole discretion. So I belabor that point a little bit, but I want you to understand that you need to have a good understanding of this contract. And mostly you need to be able to talk with your buyers. And when you're a listing agent, talk to your sellers about these dates and how, buyer having the skin in the game, So if a buyer is asking for 60 days for finance and appraisal, they can hold your seller hostage for 60 days and then cancel the contract and get nothing out of it. So short deadlines are nice. But that is, guys, that's a question. I'm just going to open it up to questions on anything on the contract.
To counter offer, we would just write a new repsy.
To counter offer, write a new repsy. Here, I'll do it for you real quick. Okay. I just got this offer from Vicky, sent this over as her buyer. I'm the listing agent on it. And I tell my sellers, it's actually not a bad offer, but you know what? I think we need to try to push them a little bit to get this. Cause again, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, this buyer can get up. They don't need to give a reason. They're just going to say it's for finance and appraisal and they can cancel this and we get nothing. So I want to tighten this date up. What am I going to do? I don't write a new repsy, Antonio. It's a great question, though. I'm going to go in here and I'm just going to do this. And I'm going to say this is addendum number 1. This is a counter offer. Forgive me if I don't fill this out right. I'm just saying offer reference date, which was today. And I put Jane Doe, right? We'll abbreviate JD address. And then I just want to counter and just say section 24. Charlie of REPC, real estate purchase contract, to be October 3rd. That's the only. Seller loves everything about the offer. They just want that done. And then I'm going to say the buyer shall have until 1 o'clock, blah, 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 tomorrow to sign. Then I'm going to check this as seller and seller. So you can see here was the offer, right?
Mm-hmm.
Here's the offer. Here's my counter offer. Now, read this. To the extent the terms of this addendum modify or conflict, including all prior addendum counteroffers, these terms shall control. So everything in that offer stays the way it is. All the dates, the home warranty being included, the purchase price, the inclusions. The only thing I, as a listing agent on behalf of the seller, am changing in that offer is this. That's it. So make sure you understand that when you're writing that. again, between buyers and sellers. If it's not modified in here, it stays. Make sense?
Yes.
Antonio, that's how you would handle that as a counteroffer, right? You don't need to do it. You would just come in, you would check counteroffer, seller presents the buyer the terms of, and I would come in here addendum number 1. And then again, maybe we've got a couple of things. Purchase price to be, $1,030,000 or whatever it may be, and due diligence deadline, tightening up my deadlines, and we need 4 hours of, 4 days of possession afterwards. So that's where, as the listing agent, you're going to go through and realize that unless it's modified here, if this was the only thing that we did, everything else stays the same in this contract except for what we change here. Does that answer your question, Antonio?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank
got it.
you.
You guys can see there's a lot to the Repsy, right? Keep doing these classes. I'm always happy, and you're always welcome to call me. And if you got questions on them, because there's a lot of stuff, but that was just the basics. I hope that was helpful to give you a little bit of my interpretation of the Repsy and how I write it and kind of explain it to my sellers. So I hope that was beneficial. Are any final questions?
No, that helped a lot.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mike. This is so helpful, so educational to me.
Good.
Yeah, I'll
Fantastic.
come
Well, I'm
in.
happy to help.
Yeah, I will join next class too.
That sounds great. I hope to see you guys all soon. Good luck, and let's all go sell some houses.
Great,
Yes.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.